I held her songs, her secrets, and her last breath. I am a 1968 Ford Mustang, and for 35 years, I was also her coffin. What did I witness on that dark road? Stay with me, because the truth I've held buried in the earth is more terrifying than you can imagine. I held her songs, her secrets, and her last breath. I am a 1968 Ford Mustang, and for 35 years, I was also her coffin. What did I witness on that dark road? Stay with me, because the truth I've held buried in the earth is more terrifying than you can imagine. I held her songs, her secrets, and her last breath. I am a 1968 Ford Mustang, and for 35 years, I was also her coffin. What did I witness on that dark road? Stay with me, because the truth I've held buried in the earth is more terrifying than you can imagine. My life began not on an assembly line in Dearborn, but on a summer afternoon in 1985, when her hands first touched my steering wheel. She was Amelia Larson, but to me, she was simply the source of the music. She named me Bluebird, a 1968 Ford Mustang, painted in a shade of twilight blue that matched the ink she used to write her lyrics. For 5 years, I was more than a machine. I was her confidant, her rehearsal space, her vessel. My worn vinyl seats absorbed her tears and the vibrations of her guitar strings as she wrestled with melodies that seemed to come from a place of ancient sorrow. My engine, a steady V8 heartbeat, hummed a counter-melody to the songs she composed on long drives through the winding roads of Stone Creek, Colorado. The pines rose on either side of the narrow two-lane road like patient sentinels, guarding the secrets of the valley. I was the keeper of those secrets, the silent witness to her dreams of leaving this small mountain town, a place that could swallow a person whole. She dreamed of Nashville, of stages where her voice could finally be heard. On October 12, 1990, she sang her heart out at the Riverside Diner, her voice filling the smoky room with a hopeful melancholy that was her signature. It was a sound that could break your heart and mend it at the same time. After her set, she packed her worn acoustic guitar in my trunk, its case covered in stickers from towns she only hoped to see. She turned my key, and my headlights cut through a night that felt colder than it should have. We were swallowed by the darkness of the two-lane highway, and with her, I vanished. No scream, no sign of struggle, no sound, just gone. For 35 years, the world heard nothing. The case went cold, a ghost story told in hushed tones by the locals who had watched her grow up. The Stone Creek Sheriff's Department mounted a search, but they were looking for evidence of a crash, a runaway. They searched for a girl and her car, but they never thought to ask the car where she went. They never considered that the earth itself could be an accomplice to a crime. The silence that began that October evening would become the most haunting sound the valley had ever known. Until one day, the earth could no longer keep its secret, and I was forced to give back what I had taken. The truth, I've learned, has a way of rising to the surface even after decades buried in the ground. And my story, her story, was about to become very loud. That night, my headlights cut through the pines that rose on either side of the narrow road like patient sentinels. The autumn wind cut through the skeletal remains of oak trees, their branches clawing at the gray October sky like desperate fingers. The air was crisp, smelling of pine sap and the clean, sharp scent of impending winter. Amelia was humming, a new melody taking shape in the quiet space between my engine's low rumble and the whistle of the wind against my chrome trim. This was the real Amelia, the one only I was privy to. Her fingers tapped a nervous, excited rhythm on my dashboard, a habit she had when a song was close to being born, a secret language between us. We passed mile marker 47, the halfway point to her small rented cabin nestled deep in the woods. The local radio station, KSCV, was playing softly, the DJ's voice a familiar drone. But she reached over and turned the knob, silencing the tinny speaker. "Don't need them," she whispered, her words fogging the cold windshield for a moment. "We've got our own music tonight." She was right. The sound of my tires on the cracked asphalt was our baseline, my steady engine our rhythm section. I was more than a machine in those moments. I was an extension of her, a steel and glass body for her boundless, fragile spirit. Her worn leather boots rested lightly on my pedals, a familiar weight that told me all was right in our small, self-contained world. Outside, the landscape was a blur of dark trees and the occasional, lonely glint of a distant farmhouse light. You could drive a whole mile and not realize you passed your own childhood. That's how memories vanished around here, quietly and without protest. But inside my cabin of blue vinyl and polished steel, she was safe. She was home. The not knowing was a torture that would soon begin for her family. The endless questions without answers that would slowly destroy their sanity. But for this one final moment, there was only peace. It was the last time either of us would feel that way. The change came suddenly, a tear in the fabric of the quiet. It was as if the story we were living in had reached its final peaceful page, and the author had turned it with a violent flick of the wrist. A pair of bright, insistent headlights stabbed through the darkness in my rearview mirror. They were closing the distance too fast. An aggressive presence on this lonely highway that had, moments before, felt like our private sanctuary. Amelia's humming stopped. Her hand tightened on my steering wheel, a small, involuntary reflex. The gentle rhythm her fingers had been tapping on my dashboard ceased. The music was over. She glanced in the mirror, her brow furrowed with confusion, not yet fear. The vehicle behind us was a large, dark pickup truck, its grille a menacing slash of chrome. I knew that truck. It haunted the parking lots of Stone Creek, a shadow that always seemed to be lurking near the edges of Amelia's life. It flashed its high beams twice. Not a warning, not a greeting. It was a summons. "What does he want?" she said aloud, her voice a tight whisper that my vinyl seats absorbed. She eased her foot off my accelerator, slowing us down with a gentle grace he did not deserve. The truck didn't slow with us. It stayed right on my tail, a predator chasing its prey, its headlights pinning us in their glare. There was nowhere to go. The forest was on both sides, black and endless. Finally, she pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. My tires crunched on the loose stones, a sound that felt loud and final in the sudden quiet. She killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was deafening, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of my cooling manifold. The truck pulled up alongside us, its own engine idling, a low, threatening growl that vibrated through my frame. Monsters aren't just found in basements. Sometimes they drive pickup trucks and know your name. The driver's side window rolled down, and a familiar face leaned out, illuminated by my soft interior light. It was Daniel Croft, the sheriff's son. A wave of relief washed over Amelia, visible in the relaxing of her shoulders. A breath she didn't know she was holding released into the cold air. "Danny, you scared the life out of me," she laughed, a nervous tremor still caught in her voice. But my mirrors, my cold, impartial glass eyes, showed me what she couldn't see. They showed me the truth. The look in his eyes wasn't friendly. It wasn't concerned. It was possessive. It was the look of a collector who had just cornered his most prized possession. The conversation started calmly enough, a performance for an unseen audience. My passenger side window was down, and their voices drifted in on the cold night air, weaving a scene of false concern. He was asking where she'd been, why she hadn't called him back. His tone was light, practiced, but an undercurrent of something hard and possessive ran beneath it. I had felt this before, the vibration of his presence on nights when he'd wait for her after a gig, his smile a mask that never quite reached his eyes. Every answer he gave was like a knife made of fog. You could feel the edge, but not see it. Amelia was polite but firm, her voice steady. She told him it was over, that she was focusing on her music, that she was leaving for Nashville soon. That was the word that broke him. Nashville. The word represented a story he couldn't control, a future he wasn't in. The idea of her escaping his orbit was something his mind, steeped in small-town entitlement, couldn't process. His voice lost its manufactured charm, replaced by a raw, cold anger that chilled the air inside my cabin. "You're not going anywhere without me," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, a sentence passed down not in a courtroom, but on a desolate stretch of road. Amelia tried to start my engine, her hand trembling as she reached for the key in my ignition. She was trying to rewrite the scene, to drive us into a different chapter. But he was out of his truck in an instant. My driver's side door was wrenched open with a groan of protesting metal. There was a struggle, brief and muffled. She was a songwriter, not a fighter. There was no scream, just a choked gasp as the air was forced from her lungs. It was a sound my steel frame absorbed, a single, terrible note that would echo in my memory forever. He pulled her from my seat. The fight was short. I felt a jarring thud against my rear fender, a sickening impact that reverberated through my entire chassis. And then, nothing. Only the sound of his heavy, ragged breathing in the sudden, absolute silence. He had extinguished the music. He had stolen her name. My purpose was gone. I was no longer the Bluebird. I was a tomb. The past wasn't gone. It had just been quiet. And he had just made it eternal. He left her there, a broken note in the shadow of the pines, and drove me. His hands on my wheel felt alien, a violation. The weight of his touch was all wrong, heavy with a frantic, brutal energy where hers had been light and full of purpose. He didn't know how to handle me, grinding my gears, forcing me down a barely there dirt track that clawed at my undercarriage with sharp rocks and grasping roots. This wasn't a drive, it was an abduction. We stopped in a small clearing, a place that felt ancient and forgotten, a pocket of silence the modern world had overlooked. He shut off my engine, and my headlights dimmed, my eyes closing on the world for what I thought would be the last time. He returned at dawn. The rising sun, a sliver of orange on the horizon, glinted off the chipped yellow paint of a backhoe. It was a monstrous machine. He must have borrowed from his father's construction business, a tool of creation about to be used for erasure. He worked with a terrifying, methodical efficiency, carving a deep, rectangular pit into the cold Colorado earth. There was no ceremony, no hesitation. This wasn't a burial, it was a disposal. He pushed me toward the edge. My tires resisted, my rubber treads clinging to the solid ground, a final, futile protest. But it was useless. I tipped forward, a slow, agonizing descent into the dark. The world spun, a nauseating lurch of sky and dirt, and then I landed with a jarring thud that shuddered through my entire chassis. And then, load after load followed, a suffocating torrent of earth and stone that pressed in on all sides, the weight immense, crushing. My world shrank to the dark, claustrophobic confines of my own body, plunged into a darkness deeper than any night. Dust floated in the small space like snow caught in a photograph. The last thing I saw was the faint green glow from my dashboard clock. It flickered, held on for a moment, and then died. The burial was complete. He had erased us both from the story, or so he thought. Evil people think they can make good people disappear forever, but they're wrong. They always forget one thing. The earth always gives back what it takes. My existence became a study in pressure and muffled sound, a long, dark chapter in a story I couldn't escape. I was suspended in the earth, a forgotten secret 20 feet below the surface, a place where time lost all meaning. The years began to blur, measured not by sunrises, but by the slow, subtle shift of seasons felt through the soil. Winter was a deep, heavy cold that made my metal frame contract, a dull, rheumatic ache in my joints that was a constant reminder of my paralysis. Spring was the slow, seeping dampness of snowmelt, a persistent trickle of water finding its way through my failing window seals, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the probing of new roots. Summer was a time of vibrations. I learned to read the world through these faint tremors. I could feel the delicate, scattered footfalls of deer and the heavier, more deliberate gait of elk walking the ground above me. But there was one vibration that was different, more persistent, heavy with a weight that was more than physical. It was human. It was the rhythmic, relentless tread of a man pacing the same ground over and over again, a sentinel at a grave he didn't know existed. It was Mark, her brother. I knew his touch, the way he'd gently close my hood after checking my oil, the solid, dependable way he moved. Now, his grief was a physical force, a low frequency that traveled through the packed earth to my steel skin.
I could feel his desperate hope, his stubborn refusal to let her become just another ghost story whispered at the diner. He was the unwavering seeker, the one character who refused to let the narrative end in silence. The police had given up years ago. The case file gathered dust in a storage locker, officially open but practically forgotten. But Mark never did. He carried himself not with vengeance, but with an exhaustion that only comes from holding on to a hope too heavy to bear. For years, his footsteps were my only connection to the living world, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the life that had been stolen. He was searching, walking the very ground that held me, so close and yet worlds away. He was a man walking until the earth gave her back. And I was listening. Time is a relentless solvent. Trapped in the damp, unforgiving earth, I began to surrender parts of myself, piece by painful piece. The twilight blue paint that Amelia had so loved, the color of a hopeful dusk, began to blister and flake away, eaten by an aggressive rust that spread across my body like a bloodstain. My chrome trim, once polished to a mirror shine where she could see her own reflection, grew dull and pitted, a tarnished memory of what I once was. The constant moisture that seeped through my seals turned my cabin into a terrarium of mold and decay. The leather of my steering wheel, worn smooth by her hands as she navigated the roads and the chords of her songs, cracked and peeled away. My vinyl seats, which had once absorbed her tears and her laughter, split open, their yellowed stuffing spilling out like entrails. I was a body decomposing in slow, agonizing motion. But even in decay, some things held on. Some secrets refused to be erased. Trapped in the dry, sealed cocoon of my glove compartment was her owner's manual, a pair of cheap plastic sunglasses, and a dog-eared map of Tennessee. On that map, a single hopeful circle was drawn in her familiar blue ink around the city of Nashville. These were the artifacts of her dream, preserved in perfect stasis while the vessel that was meant to carry them rotted away. I was no longer a car. I was a memory, a story turning to iron oxide and dust.
The earth was reclaiming me, piece by piece, my steel frame groaning and sagging under the immense weight from above. What if Mark stopped looking? What if her family finally gave up hope? The questions echoed in my silent metal shell. I was becoming one with the silence, a fossil of a forgotten tragedy, my only purpose to guard the ghost of a dream. After 3 decades of near-total silence, a new sound began. It wasn't organic. It wasn't the sound of grief. It started as a low, deep hum, a vibration that felt fundamentally different from Mark's weary footsteps or the passing of animals. It was mechanical, powerful, and it was getting closer. The rumbling grew louder each day, shaking the compacted soil around me, rattling my loose windows in their rusted frames. It was the sound of progress, the sound of the modern world finally encroaching on this forgotten patch of land. This was the accidental breakthrough, the plot twist I had been waiting for without knowing it. It was the sound of heavy machinery, of bulldozers and excavators clearing the forest for a new luxury housing development, a place ironically named Pine Haven. For 35 years,
I had found a strange, dark peace in my grave. Now, that peace was being violently disturbed. The ground above me, the very earth that had held me in its cold embrace, was being scraped away layer by layer. The immense pressure on my roof lessened. The vibrations were no longer muffled tremors. They were sharp, immediate, and terrifying. I didn't know if this was a rescue or a second death. Was I about to be discovered, my secrets laid bare for the world to see? Or would I simply be crushed into unrecognizable scrap metal by a force that had no idea I was here? The rumbling was a promise of change, a violent end to the long, quiet years. And for the first time in a generation, I felt something akin to a quickening pulse in my cold, dead engine. The earth was about to give back what it had taken, and I was ready to sing my song. The moment of impact was a violent shock, a sound of screeching, tearing metal that echoed through my hollow frame like a scream I could never voice. A massive steel tooth, the bucket of an excavator, had ripped through the earth and torn a crude, violent gash in my roof. And then, for the first time in 35 years, there was light. It was a single, dusty beam that pierced the suffocating gloom of my cabin, illuminating a world of rust and decay, a snapshot of a life interrupted. The work above stopped instantly. The roar of the machine died, replaced by shouted, confused voices and the sound of heavy boots jumping down from the machinery. The light grew brighter as they dug around me, clearing away the soil with a new, frantic energy. My form began to emerge from the earth, a mangled, mud-caked specter of twilight blue. They uncovered my front grille, then a headlight, my unblinking, clouded glass eye staring up at a sky I had forgotten existed. What happens next will break your heart, because the truth that was about to be unearthed was so much worse than anything the town had ever imagined. The police were called. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape, a stark, artificial boundary against the natural chaos of the scene. I was no longer a forgotten piece of metal, a ghost in the soil. I was evidence. I was the centerpiece of a crime scene that had been dormant for more than 30 decades. A buried time capsule of violence and loss. The long silence, the one that had settled over Stone Creek like a permanent fog, was finally, irrevocably broken. The scene was a strange, sterile ballet of careful, methodical movement. Forensic teams in white Tyvek suits swarmed over my ruined body, their touch clinical and impersonal. They photographed me from every conceivable angle, dusted me for fingerprints that had long since been erased by time and moisture, and scraped samples of the soil that still clung to my chassis like a death shroud.
And then, a man broke through the police line. He moved with a purpose that the officers instinctively respected, a gravity they couldn't deny. He was older now, his face a roadmap of grief and hard years. But I knew him instantly. It was Mark. He stopped dead when he saw me, his breath catching in his throat. A uniformed officer tried to hold him back, a gentle hand on his arm, but he didn't seem to notice. He just whispered my name, a single word carried on the wind. Bluebird. He walked toward me, his hand outstretched, ignoring the official boundaries and the quiet protests. When his fingers finally touched my cold, rusted hood,
It was a jolt of recognition, a circuit completed after a lifetime of being broken. The silence between us was dense, not awkward, ancestral. He saw the violent gash in my roof, the rampant decay, the deep violation of what was once a source of pride and freedom. Tears streamed down his face, not just for his sister, but for me, for what we represented. A lost summer, a stolen future. He had searched for us for so long, and now here I was, a ghost resurrected from the clay. In his tired eyes, I saw the reflection of the young man who had once helped his sister install my spark plugs, and the haunted soul who had never, ever given up hope. He knew this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the reckoning. The investigation now focused entirely on me. I was carefully exhumed and transported on a flatbed truck to a secure police garage, a sterile, soulless environment under the constant hum and glare of harsh fluorescent lights. They treated me like a corpse, looking for the cause of death. They vacuumed my carpets, collecting fibers and soil samples that held the DNA of a bygone era. They analyzed the creeping rust patterns, trying to read a story in my decay. The trail was ice cold, and the physical evidence had been lost or deteriorated over 3.5 decades. The truth was, I was the only witness left, and I couldn't speak. The breakthrough came from a place they almost missed, a small detail that defied the logic of a standard investigation. Detective Nora Hayes, a woman with patient, inquisitive eyes, who had carried the small, strange guilt of this cold case like a splinter beneath her skin, was examining my driver's side door. She noticed the interior panel was slightly loose near the bottom, almost imperceptibly so. It was a detail only Mark or Amelia would have known. It was a secret compartment Mark had built for her, a place to stash emergency cash for her trip to Nashville. Detective Hayes, driven by a hunch that felt more like a whisper from the past, pried the panel away. Inside, nestled in the dark, hollow space, was a small plastic cassette tape case. Miraculously, it was bone dry. The tape was labeled in Amelia's familiar blue ink, Nashville Demos. Back at the station, they played it. It started with the clear, haunting sound of Amelia's voice and her acoustic guitar, a melody of hope and sorrow. But after the third song, the music stopped. It was replaced by the muffled, tinny sound of a recorded conversation, a pocket recording she must have made earlier on the day she disappeared. It was her voice, strong and unwavering, arguing with Daniel Croft. "You can't control me, Danny," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that must have terrified him. "I'm leaving. You have to accept that." His reply was chillingly clear, a voice from the grave speaking the truth. "The only way you're leaving Stone Creek, Amy," he said, his voice stripped of all charm, "is in a box." The voice on that tape was the ghost that unraveled everything. Daniel Croft, now a wealthy property developer and a respected pillar of the Stone Creek community, was brought in for questioning. He walked in with the easy confidence of a man who believed his own lies, a man who had gotten away with it for so long that the truth felt like a foreign language. He was calm, denying everything.
He claimed he barely knew Amelia Larson, that she was just another girl with a guitar who had passed through town. He was a man built for disappearance, and he had used that gift with terrifying precision. But the tape was undeniable. Presented with his own voice, his own chilling threat echoing back at him from 35 years in the past, his composure finally shattered. His carefully constructed life, built upon a foundation of buried secrets and murder, crumbled in the sterile light of that interrogation room. He confessed everything. He described the argument, the flash of narcissistic rage when she had asserted her freedom, the final, brutal act on that lonely stretch of highway. He told them where he had buried Amelia, in a shallow, unmarked grave less than a mile from where he had buried me. The truth, after 35 years of silence, came rushing out, a torrent of confession that could no longer be contained. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. For me, rusting under the harsh police lights, it was a quiet vindication. My existence had meant something. I held the key, the final piece of her story, safe within my silent metal shell, waiting for someone to listen. I was the totem of her memory, the one thing he couldn't completely destroy. The man who had silenced her was now silenced himself. His future, a sterile room and 4 concrete walls. His story was over. Hers was about to be heard. My final journey was on the back of a tow truck, heading for an evidence impound lot from which I knew I would never return. I was too damaged to be restored, too much of the crime to ever be anything else. My twilight blue paint was a ruin of rust and mud, my frame bent, my spirit broken. But as I was driven through the familiar streets of Stone Creek one last time, a strange and beautiful thing happened. From the open window of a passing car, I heard a sound that jolted me more than the excavator's tooth. It was Amelia's voice, clear and strong, singing one of the songs from the demo tape. Mark had honored her dream. He had taken the tape, that ghost I had guarded for so long, and had the recordings professionally mastered and released. Her music, the very reason for my existence, was finally out in the world. Her voice was no longer a secret kept within my rusted doors. It was on the radio, filling the autumn air, immortal. My purpose was complete. I was the Bluebird who had guarded her song until the world was ready to hear it. My own story ends here, in the quiet of a dusty, forgotten lot, surrounded by the ghosts of other tragedies. But hers, the one that truly mattered, was just beginning. Justice had been served, but it had come late, carved from stone and sorrow. Some mysteries don't end with courtroom confessions or the clang of a prison door. They end in silence. But this one ended with a song. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a happy ending. Sometimes it looks like a melody, finally set free. An act of remembrance that ensures no name and no song stays forgotten. Thank you for watching. The story of Amelia Larson is a reminder that even when a case goes cold, hope can endure in the heart of a single determined person. Her music, silenced for so long, is now her legacy. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe justice, no matter how long delayed, is always worth pursuing? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Unfound and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Together, we can make sure no name stays forgotten.